Welcome, Robin.
Thank you.
Today, the intention is to free flow, to see what wants to come, to see what life wants to speak through us, and to explore different topics related to spirituality in general.
Thanks for having me. Also, congratulations, I guess, for the podcast. I love that you let yourself do it. I think it takes some courage to put yourself on the internet and sharing your ideas and broadcasting whatever comes up for you, and also inviting others into it, like me. I think it's a great act of courage that you're doing, and I celebrate it.
Thank you.
Well done.
You just said that you were happy about that I am allowing myself to do this, or like I'm letting myself do this. And I'm curious about this concept of like letting ourselves do something, because I believe that, yeah, sometimes life wants us to do things and we may not let ourselves do things. So I wonder if you have something to say about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Two of the main drivers, in human life is the driver of inspiration, which wants to create. We can call it creativity. And there is the aspect of fear, which is in a way afraid to create, afraid to do, afraid to, in a way, basically that something bad will happen. So for me, life is always in some way wanting us to act, do things, see things, discover things, learn, grow, develop, deepen. And a lot of that has to do with putting ourselves into the world to live our own creativity.
And what happens? What happens when, you mentioned fear. I also, sometimes think, at least for my life, the inner critic is the part that really puts a challenge into what can I do. Also, I believe for myself, and I spoke about this quite often in the podcast, which is like the stories that the mind creates and how those stories, sometimes, if we believe in them, and especially the bad stories that we tell ourselves, I'm not good enough to do the podcast. I'm not good enough to talk about this, or I'm not good enough for all these things. Yeah, they can they can limit ourselves in order to do something. So, I think fear is a big word, but I wonder if you want to maybe philosophize a bit on like what is fear, or why would it stop us to do these beautiful things in life?
I think that's a great start. Well, one has to discover a little bit like what is fear about. And for me, fear has, obviously we can go different directions with it. But the way I like to start to looking at fear is that fear is something that is actually positive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That I never heard that before. And I'm very curious about it.
One thing that I think is really crucial to understand in spiritual development, or a place to land, maybe that's where is the spiritual journey leading? The spiritual journey is a journey into acceptance, harmony with the way things are, and love, right? So it is in a way about entering more and more into an open, allowing celebration space of all of life is included. There is nothing in life that is excluded from my love. It's all, everything's welcome, or maybe not welcome, but everything is understood. And fear is part of life. Fear is part of the intelligence that creates all of this. So it has its place and it has its reasons. Finding a way to start getting more comfortable with fear and becoming more curious with fear, I feel is a great way to start, is to not assume that fear is something bad or a hindrance. Like one of the sayings that we have in the Zen coaching community, which is like a very famous Zen proverb, is to let the obstacle be the path. The obstacle is the path, and we have the conditioning to see that the obstacle is something annoying and in the way of my path.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to get the fuck out of my my path so that I can keep walking. But rather, what happens when we include the obstacle as, oh, this is not blocking my path. This obstacle is actually part of my path. And to bring that sort of lens onto fear as well. Oh, fear is coming up. Interesting. So fear for me is basically, if you look at it strictly from the human biological sense, it is an instinctual response because the organism has a very deep drive to survive. Survival is the most important thing for the organism. It's like priority number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's an instinct. The instinct to survive is really, really deep. And fear is here to make sure that we do survive.
Yes.
It's supposed to, here's danger, watch out, be alert, be attentive. And for human beings, it becomes a lot more complicated because we have developed a rational mind, which is in a way almost like another identity on top of our biological identity. We have our identity as the body, which is basically something that wants to live and eat and procreate and be with others. And we have also the psychological sense of self, which is to a large extent a product of the brain and the mind. So the mind follows the same programs as the biological organism. So the brain also has a survival instinct. However, it becomes way more complex with the human being because we have one of the main things that we as humans have is that we have a social instinct. We have a deep instinct to belong and a wish to be part of something. And we also know that belonging has its roots in survival as well. Because if we're left alone, we're in danger. If we're in a big group, we're more safe. So the psychological fear is which is kind of interesting in a way that our rational mind has a lot of irrational fear. Yeah. So that fear is something that is actually not helping us. The fear that says, well, maybe I shouldn't make a podcast because other people might not like it. They may judge me. And that feels very unsafe for me. So I'm just not going to do it. Understanding that fear has its place and has its roots in something very important is important because then we're not fighting with the fear. But also seeing that actually this fear is not really supporting my growth. It's actually hindering my growth. So it's about learning to love the fear, be grateful of the fear, but at the same time not listen to it, to actually move beyond. And that brings one of the most important spiritual principles, in my view, which is the principle of include and transcend. We cannot transcend anything before we have included it. And modern spirituality has developed a narrative that says ignore and transcend. This is fear. Just ignore it and go beyond it. Ignore and transcend. Don't listen to the fear. Just push past it, And while there is a little bit of wisdom in that, there is also quite a lot of ignorance because now we're not living as a whole being anymore. We're living in denial of parts of ourselves. So including and transcending. That's the principle of and how to deal with fear. Include it, let it be there, and bring it with you into what you're doing.
Yeah.
But don't let it be your boss, Like the mind is it's a great servant, but a terrible master, someone said, I heard.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I really appreciate your wisdom and insight about fear. Yeah, it really reminds me also that hearing you and me, at least I heard about spirituality only a few years ago. And what comes to my mind is like a normal person being out there listening to this, or like someone who has not been so deep into a spirituality, and it's hearing fear can be positive. How can I include fear? The fear is not the obstacle, it's the path, in these spiritual terms that might be a bit harder to understand for someone who has not ever listened about this. So I wonder if it's just in a nutshell, you can, explain to to a 5-year-old maybe, or just like a person who never heard about this. Especially because something that changed my life was to hear the stories of the mind. I never knew that we have a thinking mind. We have a rational mind, how I heard you saying, and we have the presence and the presence of the body, the presence of life. And I just didn't know how the voice in the mind is part of my identity and how that voice also relates to fear. But separating myself from that voice, it allowed me to look at the voice in the mind. So for someone who has not experienced that separation yet, for someone who, is just like, yeah, I have fear of going to the internet. I have fear of what other thinks of me. I have fear of these things. Yeah, if you have some inspiration to, what would you say to someone who has never heard about these things before?
That's a good question. So basically, what you're speaking about is really like finding identity. That's what I hear you speaking about. Realizing that, like you said, like I can hear the voice in my mind. And it really comes to like, okay, so how can we explain that phenomenon, right? That's important to understand. Like, who am I really originally, and what parts of myself did I learn, right? So that's an important distinction. So basically the mind, it's like a machine that learns and repeats. And all of us have been programmed from the beginning. So all of us is an individual. I am me and you are you, and we are not the same, right? And from an early age, we start learning from our environment, our parents, and our closest ones, our siblings, later our teachers. So like our family and our teachers, they teach us about life. And that means do this, don't do that. Like when you're 1-year-old, or when you're 2 and you're walking happily along the sidewalk and then you want to turn into the road, your mother says, no, don't go in the road. And we learn what is right and wrong in life. We learn this is what we should be doing, this is what we should be doing.
Like fear is wrong in a way. It reminds me of that.
Yeah, well, basically fear is something, so that let's take that moment when the child wants to cross the road and the mother yanks their arm and says, no. The response of the child then is fear.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I did something wrong. And that registers. But the point that I'm trying to make is that we learn all the rules of society through our parents, our family, our teachers. And those rules create a sense of what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior. And that gets socially reinforced over time. And we start to develop a sense of what I think is right and what I think is wrong. And this development is what you could call the superego, or like the psychological self, which is built and constructed based on our experience. And that is a lot on what we have learned, what I have learned from others. And also, what have I learned? What is the feedback on my behavior? So this is like a social construct that has been passed on to us. And this creates what you could call a false sense of self, of like, this is who I think I am. All of these ideas that I've learned over time they're now so integrated that I believe that I am these ideas. I am this. And unfortunately, we live in a culture that is very much living in the paradigm of you should reward good behavior and you should punish bad behavior. What is considered good is celebrated and you are rewarded. And if you're doing something that's not socially accepted, it is bad, it is wrong. So we are conditioned, like as soon as I do something wrong, I'm punished. I'm punished by some sort of aggressive. It can be as simple from the parent to say, no, don't do this. I've said stop, or whatever, So we learn that certain things are bad and certain things are good. And if I do bad things will happen to me. That's why we are so controlled by fear. because we've been programmed in that way. So that's the part where I was speaking about how fear actually arises not because there's a danger, but because there is a certain expectation of punishment or ridicule if I do what I do. So fear is of course here to protect us. Nobody wants to be punished or ridiculed. So we need some inner support to make sure that we are only being celebrated all the time and not punished, ridiculed, made fun of, etc. So again, fear helps us avoid negative experiences. The problem is that becomes a pattern that controls us. It's actually there to help us, but it becomes something that actually controls us and holds us down. So this is a long-winded answer, but basically fear is focused on one thing, and that is safety. Safety first. And the biggest safety is to survive. But there is also being safe in a group. Avoiding speaking up too much. Avoid to take too much space because maybe others will not like it, and then they will punish me in some way, or they will freeze me out, or they will be mad at me, or something bad will happen. So it's better to stay safe than to be alive, basically. So this is really important. Fear is not interested in our happiness. Fear couldn't care less about our happiness. Fear only cares about our safety. So if we have to be depressed and miserable and have no energy for anything at all, and just stay very safe in our little apartment and do our little job and not stir the pot at all and never speak up, that's what fear would like us to do, because that is the safest place we can be in. So I would say to those who are struggling with fear and who listens a lot to fear, it's important to see that the fear is not interested in your happiness. The fear is interested in your safety, and your happiness will have to go. Your aliveness is a threat to your safety, because if we're really truly alive, we take some risks and we have fun and we're a bit more open. And that is risky, because if you're open and you expose yourself, there is a risk of judgment and ridicule. So rather avoid that, right?
Yeah.
So it's mainly about seeing what is fear. How is fear influencing me? What happens when I listen to fear? And do I really truly want to live the kind of life that listens to that voice more often than not? I think that's a good inquiry to ask.
Yeah, very inspiring. When I listen to that, it really reminds me of inner child, and also reminds me of adult self. I often speak here about, we all have different parts, and there is something that we probably all have heard, which is the inner child. When you were saying about the father or the mother saying, don't cross the road, and putting those conditions into the child. And I personally have learned for my life, and I'm not like a spiritual teacher or anything, maybe not yet, or maybe never, who knows. But something that I learned is that from childhood, we carry some of those things into adulthood. And sometimes we are led by those conditions. We are led by fear. And when I was saying about separating yourself from the story or separating yourself from the mind, I am learning, and I have learned in a way how that fear inside of me, don't do the podcast, or you're going to do ridicule, or you're having no views, or whatever that is, how that is a part of me, and how there is another part of me which I call the adult self. Because I believe the inner child or the children have a lot of fears because they're new into this world. They just don't know what's going to happen. A lot of uncertainty. And that's the parents there and the teachers who can bring them that sense of security. Now, someone grows up with those things inside and have not really become aware of those parts of themselves, and are led by fear all the time. And I'm not like enlightened, but I noticed that many times in my life I'm led by fear, and some other times I can connect with my adult self. So Yeah, I would like to hear you or your take on this thing of like this adult self, or how to parent ourselves, or how can we get the support that we need from our own self, from our inner wisdom, so that we are not always led by fear, or so that this fear that we have, we can incorporate it, but at the same time choose something different, choose that happiness that you were talking about.
Yeah, I feel a bit touched when you ask about it, because, you know, all children want to be truly loved for who they are. We all have that expectation, really. A child wants to be totally accepted and loved and cared for and nourished and celebrated by the adults. You know, the child isn't able to give themselves what they need. Like a baby literally can't regulate itself. If you leave a baby alone for long enough, it will die. You know, it will cry itself to death. It will die either of starvation, or it will die of some sort of like heart arrest or something. It will go into such a panic that it will stop breathing, or the heart rate will be too high or something like that. You know, like a baby literally can't stay alive alone. It needs nervous system regulation and food and love and touch and care. It needs a loving environment in order to grow up into a functioning human being. And it's difficult to be a human being, you know? So all of us have our limit of what we can love and what we can't love, what we judge. We all carry anger. We all carry frustration and hatred and resentment and grief. And we're not able to be there. No parent is able to fully be there for their child. You know, everyone makes mistakes. So we are all wounded. So the outer adult is meant to give the child, in a way, unconditional acceptance and love. And they fail. Every parent fails that job, because it's not possible, really, in a way, because we didn't receive it as a child. So whatever the parents reject in the child starts rejecting in themselves. So that's like just poor. And that doesn't mean that just means like, if the child wants attention now and the mother gives it attention 30 seconds later, during those 30 seconds, the child is like, I'm not receiving what I want. Something is wrong. So even in the most harmless moments, something gets registered that and very often the mom can become frustrated with the child, not because she's frustrated with the child, because it's like, life is just so much, and I'm sleep deprived, and I'm sort of taking care of one child or two or three. I have the money, to responsibility, the house, my relationship with my husband. We haven't had sex in 1 year. It's like, I'm tired. I'm not. It's like my boobs they don't seem to belong to me anymore. It's like, where is my life? You know, and I'm working, and my boss is on my ass, and emails and 5 social media platforms. You know, the mother is like, oh, you know. She's a bit tired and frustrated. And the child feels that energy, and it believes it must have something to do with me. You know, mom is not available. Maybe she doesn't love me, or I'm doing something wrong, or now she yelled at me because I was hungry. So the point that I'm making is that all of us are wounded, both from just human life on earth, and also, of course, more painful things where the parent is actually actively like angry or even abusive towards the kids. So whatever is not accepted in the child starts rejecting in themselves. And then we grow up to become an adult person. But that part of us, all of that part that wasn't seen, loved, and accepted as we were children, feels still. It hasn't been validated. Like, yes, you know, like you have value, and you are a beautiful contribution to this world. Those parts feel very alone and small, and I'm not right. You know, there's a big sense of guilt and shame about those parts. So basically, and once our childhood is over, it's over. We we can't receive that from our parent anymore.
Yeah.
We needed that as kids, but now we're an adult, which means we don't need it from the outside anymore. We reject ourselves internally because we were rejected when we were younger. The acknowledgement is to see that these parts, I carry this pain inside, and I have this rejection of certain, and shame and guilt around certain ways of me, you know? I feel shame about my sexuality, or about showing myself feels really scary, or whatever. So the inner adult is basically the part of us that is able to be with and accept those parts of me which were not accepted and celebrated in my childhood. So it's about sort of learning to say yes to anything that shows up inside. And that is difficult because we have learned that these things of me are wrong and bad. And then we believe that, and I think that this part of me is bad and wrong, you know? We have internalized that. And that is what we believe we think. No, I'm not good at this, and or whatever it is. So there's a confusion. That which I learned as a child, I now believe is my own opinion. So it's about learning to open up to the more painful parts inside, and that's a big process and takes a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And I would love to hear more on like how you do that. But before we go into that, I actually felt inspired, since we were talking about childhood wounds, to maybe share a bit of some of the wounds that I have encountered in myself, especially since I started doing inner work. And maybe if you feel the call, I would love to hear if you want to talk about one of your wounds to someone that may never heard of, like, yeah, what are wounds, and like, this is all maybe very philosophically or something hard to understand. So maybe to give a concrete example, and this made me vulnerable. I love vulnerability, or at least in this moment I do. So yeah, I want to share one of my wounds so that someone may understand how that plays out. I discover that I had a mother wound, probably, also a father wound, that I needed to prove myself for love. I needed to act a certain way so I would receive love. So, I was always like an exemplary kid in that way, like always good behavior, like this, fit in the box in a way. And that way I received love. But sometimes I didn't want that, right? And then I receive punishment in a way, or I receive like the no's, and don't do that. You need to eat this way. You need to do this way, this way. Through life, I understood that in order to receive love, I need to act a very specific way. So I'm not fully myself. I am how people want me to be.
Or even how you think people want you to be.
Exactly, because it's all a story in the mind. And this played out in relationships a lot for me. In my past relationships, it was all about pleasing the other, or it was all about showing the lights, showing my light side, my funny side, my happy side to them, and about hiding those things that I did not accept. And how I understand it is that, yeah, throughout time and with time, since childhood, I was just like not comfortable showing those shadow parts of myself, or not fully being myself. Because if I was fully myself, I would not get love. Yeah, and that's one example of one of the wounds that I have discovered, and how that, even being 34 now, that still plays a role in my life. And I am now trying to love also those parts and show myself fully to someone, and be okay if that person doesn't love me or doesn't want me, because I can find the love within. As long as I find the love within, then my inner child feels safe.
Beautiful.
So I wonder if you want to share maybe a wound you have been working on in your life.
Sure. Well, in a way, it's all the same wound, you know? It's like, am I gonna be myself authentically and receive and be received by some and not received by others? Or am I going to adapt? Am I going to bend a bit? Am I going to be more of what is celebrated and less of what is not celebrated? So when I was a child, I had a very hard time speaking in public, or speaking at all, actually. I was since I was 5, I was in a speech therapist. Once a week, I went to the hospital to see this speech therapist to help me learn to speak. So I grew up with quite an angry father who had issues with basically anger and drinking. And quite early, I developed. So I was very shy as a boy. I was not very open. I felt quite challenged to open up and to speak. Yeah, actually, to that degree that I developed a speech impediment, a stutter, and I needed to go see a speech therapist. And we met weekly, and I went to all of these different sort of bigger camps, speech therapy camps, and this continued up into my teens and my early adulthood, and I was improving, but there was always this big fear of. It was an enormous fear of being seen. So, for example, certain things were easier, like speaking to myself worked pretty well. I almost didn't stutter at all when I was speaking to myself as a child. But having a conversation was a bit more of a challenge, and speaking to somebody I was respecting or a bit, fearful of was even worse. Answering the phone was a nightmare, because answering the phone was really like, now I'm supposed to say something and they are waiting there on the other side of the phone. So it became a very big anxiety for me when the phone rang. Speaking in front of other people was like, it was beyond scary. And also reading out loud was also very difficult, because I had to say exactly the words that were on the page in the order that they were there. And when we were reading in school, everyone had the book open. Page 35, Robin, your turn to read. And I know, like, if I cheat in some way, they will all notice. So that basically made me completely freeze up, and I couldn't even read.
Wow.
I just said, no, I'm not reading. So I refused to read in class, for example. And eventually the teacher accepted that I don't have to read, and I don't have to make presentations in front of the class and so on. So basically, that was a very strong social anxiety that continued up in my early adulthood. Less than then, but still, it was quite there. And it had to do really with showing myself, to speak up and to be seen, to actually say, hey, here I am, I'm saying something, and I'm speaking my truth in the moment, and it was a lot about having expectations from the outside, if I felt any expectation, I froze up immediately. So expectations were super, super scary to me. And then, of course, I had expectations that they had expectations on me, which escalated things. The way that I dealt with this was actually it was quite funny. I started a sales job when I was 15, selling door to door. So I was knocking at the door, and it was like, and they opened.
Wow.
It's like,
What a
hey,
job.
right. I was selling cookies and socks, and that was very scary to me. But I also had a talent for it, so it was a bit bittersweet. I was good at it on my good days, so it was very, very dependent on the start. If I had a good start of the day, the whole day flowed well. If I had a bad start with a lot of stutter, it went really bad. So I could end up like first or last, depending on the day. And like over time, I exposed myself in different ways to speaking in front of other people. Later, I actually became the supervisor of that job. So I had a little group of 30 to 40 salespeople who I was training and teaching. So that's been a journey for me about overcoming my fear of speaking and the fear of being listened to and seen. So that's one of the big ones,
Hmm.
which I'm
Nice.
of course still working on. Because this is another thing with healing. It doesn't end,
It doesn't.
It doesn't really end.
But that's the beautiful part of healing, I believe.
Yes.
Once the journey starts and we start accepting those parts of our journey and ourself, our wounds, we know that they're just part of us.
They are. And it's learning to distinguish that there is healing and there is awakening. And those things are two different things. However, healing supports awakening and awakening supports healing. So they're like two wings, flapping in the journey, the inner journey. But they are different, People can be very awakened and quite fucked up, and
Yeah.
vice versa. They can be very, very refined, but not very spiritually awake.
Hmm.
So for me, healing is basically the body and the mind. And once that is, and the collective, and the planet and the animals and, everything. So like healing is never ending. Awakening seems to have some sort of a state, the myth of enlightenment, that there is such a thing as being a Buddha, fully awake.
Oh, I'm so curious about enlightenment. It's just that, we have had so many conversations about it. And now I want to, after hearing your story, like, thank you for sharing such a vulnerable truth. And also, I didn't know that from you. And it's fun to hear that because I've seen you speaking in front of hundreds so many times and giving workshops and everything. So I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. And and
it's shown myself it's been a real mirror for me to see that we can really overcome. Like, I'm convinced like all of our social anxieties can be overcome. And it's a balance. It's a balance of, so healing has a lot to do with accepting who we are as we are, and to not try to be something else, but to really be totally at peace or in harmony with what we are right now. And the other side of it is to challenge ourselves, to not stay in the safe space all the time, but to move forward and let fear be the guide of the sweet spot is like, I'm excited and drawn to, but also afraid of wherever you feel that, that's really the way to go.
Yeah, and fear transforms. It's just a present moment thing as well. So I would love to hear a bit of like what you do actually for a job now and how you help people with different things in their lives, if you want to share a bit.
Sure. Right. So right now I'm a coach, which is a really, really a vague thing, no? But basically I have clients, and these clients are all, what they have in common is that they may have a sense that either there's a sense of like life is not really truly fulfilling as it is, and I have a sense that something is missing. Something is missing, and like I am missing. My life feels not truly authentic in a way. Or they are already on the path, and they have had some sort of awakening, and they know now that I want to continue this journey, and I want to continue growing and waking up and living that awakening more. And they use me as a coach to become more self-aware of themselves. So my job as a coach is really to be a mirror, to see if I can reflect back what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, and to ask good questions. And this is important, actually, questions that I don't know the answer to myself, because I'm a coach. That doesn't mean I know. It just means like, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and this makes me curious. And I'm asking a question, which for me is like, that could open up a bit more. Now that would help me understand more. And in that, of course, the client also starts understanding more about themselves, because we're on this journey of what's the truth here? What's really going on? What's underneath here? Or I wonder why you're acting in this way. Like what's behind that? What is it that you really want? You say that this is what you want, but it doesn't feel true for me, you know? Like I don't know what you want, but so I'm reflecting and asking. And then on that journey, we discover things together. We realize beliefs that are working underneath the habitual patterns and wounds, senses of limitations, of depletions, deficiency, things that are difficult to say yes to, parts of us that we think are wrong. You know, like you said, there's something wrong with me. I'm stuck. I'm so tired of this and that, you know, like we run into wounds and resistance. And my job as a coach is to help the client open up and say yes to whatever arises in the session. And that can be very challenging sometimes because certain things are very difficult to say yes to, like shame or guilt or sense of being abandoned or, you know, like...
inner critic for me.
Yeah, the inner critic, exactly. So helping to understand what is the inner critic, but also to see like, okay, what's the gift from the critic, you know? Why is it there? I usually say that the inner critic is our inner support with a massive communication problem.
And negativity. At least my inner critic
exactly,
is so negative.
Yeah, exactly. And the inner critic doesn't have to be negative, you know? The negative voice it's an immature and quite unrefined expression of something very beautiful, which again, if we try to get rid of the inner critic, we can't, because the inner critic is an instinctual program that is hardwired into our organism, back to what I said beginning with the survival. So the inner critic is not going away. We cannot get rid of it. So trying to get rid of it, we can try that our whole lives. So rather than trying to get rid of it, what happens when I open up to it, but I try to help it, like, okay, what do you really want? Like, what are you trying to tell me by saying I'm a fucked up human being? Like, what do you mean when you say that? You know? Because, you know, so rather than trying to get rid of the critic, trying to understand the critic and to see that it's a very twisted expression of love. And so the inner critic can become our inner support, which is the good news, you know. The inner critic is the thing that says, you know, Robin, maybe this wasn't exactly your, you know, maybe what you said there wasn't really what you truly meant. It's like, yeah, you know, I was a little bit in anger, actually. I realized that. And when I see that, there's a moment of grief of like, oh, I wasn't expressing my love in that moment. I was expressing anger and judgment. Thank you, inner support, for helping me see that and for processing and to return, helping me back to my heart. And now I can see that actually what I really wanted to say was this. That's a kind inner critic that's supporting me. But in the unrefined version, that voice is saying, Robin, you're such a fucking idiot for saying like that. Now you made them feel bad and you're terrible and now they are suffering and they're never going to forgive you and da-da-da-da, you know. It spins up a very, very negative narrative. But the ultimate message is actually a positive one. It's like, I noticed that you were not in your heart that moment. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I noticed and now I'm letting you know. Because basically understanding the critic is a little bit of, if we go back to the example of don't cross the road, there's a part of our mind, which I call the superego, that says, don't cross the road, got it. And then next day we do it again and mama says, don't cross the road like that. Oh, okay, I got it. Don't cross the road. Crossing the road is wrong. And then we learn you need to look to both sides. That becomes an inner guidance that says, Jorge, if you want to survive, don't run into the road. So when you're running and you see the road, when you're 5, you're like, right. I have a son now, he's 7, and he has learned that when he gets close to the road, he slows down and stops. And then he looks back to show me, look, I stopped here, you know? So his super ego has helped him learn that here you stop. Because one, your father and mother won't get mad at you and yell at you, and you will survive and not be driven over by a car. So he has understood that now. Let's fast forward to this little child being 30.
Yeah.
And they run into the road and they're hit by a car. Then that voice that learned you shouldn't run into the road is saying, fuck, man, why did you run into the road? You know you shouldn't do that. You're stupid, whatever, you know, like, so that voice, which is here to help us to learn the rules and to survive, if we start breaking those rules, it's things now is dangerous because now you're, like safety first, right? So if we start breaking those rules, and we're not listening to that voice that says, hey, Jorge, maybe you shouldn't run into the road. And you're like, fuck it, I'm going. Like, no, fuck it, don't do it. You're like, I'm going for it. Then it's like, what are you, fucking idiot? Stop. You're going to ruin everything. No. You know, it turns up the volume.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So the nasty negative critic is the same survival voice, just you've cranked up the volume now. So it's to understand that the critic, we just need to dial it down, you know?
Yeah, and for me, it's fascinating. At least I am starting to work with my critic now, and it's going to be a very long journey that it will never end. But I do notice that, yeah, of course, on the crossing the road, it's quite a simple example, but more on a day-to-day basis, you know, maybe we can say, or I can see myself, it's like the way I'm being in my relation. Am I being the man that I want to be? Am I being good enough? Or with the podcast, maybe it's easier as an example, you know, it's the episode was really bad, or this is not gonna go anywhere, or no one's gonna watch, or like all these sort of like inner critic kind of things. And it's like what you mentioned, it's like when the volume cranks up for me, it's just like, wow, incredible. And
exactly.
And at least for me, I am taking the approach, at least on the podcast, of like, I'm just doing a lot of episodes, and the more episodes I do, the lower the volume on the critic.
Exactly.
Because then I don't care so much anymore. When I did the first one, when I did the 5th one, the 20th, it's just like so different. And now I'm more at least aware of like when the mind or when the volume of the critic goes up, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know that.
You know that, right?
I have been, it's have been very alive here, very alive here, very alive here. Yeah. And it just becomes, more of a knowing. And I still don't understand why my inner critic bothers so much about the podcast, but I guess something about survival or something.
Yeah, it sounds like if you publish this podcast, you are now at risk, right?
Yeah.
So it tries every trick to not to not make any risk for you.
Yeah.
And it will call you any name it has to in order for you to not publish your podcast.
Yeah.
Because again, it doesn't care about your happiness or your expansion. It cares about your safety. And it's not happy until you're absolutely 100% mega safe, locked in a box with no key and like a little drip, just enough food to make it, you know?
And you know what's the funny thing? It's like before that, let's rewind back the last 10 years of my life where I have been really want to do a podcast, and the inner critic saying, you're not doing the podcast. You're really bad, right? Exactly. Then I do the podcast and the inner critic is like, why are you doing the podcast? You're really bad, you know? So it's just like, it's a funny thing. It's a funny part of ourselves that we have sometimes. I remember one day I learned from you on a workshop that the inner critic in a way is just never happy. Or in a way, it's just gonna talk bad about whatever it is. So in my case, it was like, you're bad because you're not doing the podcast. Now you're doing the podcast. You're bad because you're doing the podcast, and it's just like that never finished loop.
Exactly, because it plays any side. You know, if you do what it says, it criticizes you for listening to it, and if you're not doing what it says, then it calls you a fucking coward. You know, like, look at you. You didn't even publish it. What a coward. Yeah, yeah, you're never gonna make it like this. You don't take any risks and la la la. And then like, all right, I'm gonna take a risk. No, fuck, you're useless. You shouldn't take risks. It's like this is the main thing. You cannot win with the critic.
No.
You cannot win. It will always try. It will play any team.
Yeah.
To keep you stuck. So one has to relate to the critic as an outer attack. Like the critic is not your friend in that way. Of course, you can see that it's coming from fear, right?
Yeah.
It is really coming from fear. Or if you really trace it back, it's afraid. And then it's like, now it's time to be the inner parent.
Exactly.
Right? To say, all right, I hear that this is scary and I feel it and I'm going to do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, as you do episode 15, 20, 30, the critic starts relaxing. Because what? It sees that actually Jorge didn't die.
Yep.
And Jorge hasn't been ridiculed by the entire internet. Actually, people like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow, there are positive comments. So this is what is called a corrective experience. Like you have an experience that proves the opposite of what your fear is telling you.
Since we're talking about these very nice topics, I kind of wanted to also bring this topic, and I'm not sure if it's going to be one of the last topics that we talk about, but I wanted to bring this topic since you mentioned a little bit, which is about awakening, because maybe I perceive in my journey that it has been incredible to learn about this. I also have heard other teachers, some teachers, that they're very attuned into enlightenment and they really want to reach enlightenment. But for myself, I consider myself a regular human being where I have learned a bit about spirituality and I have learned a bit about who am I, what is the ego, what are the stories, and the awakening within it. And so, I'm curious if you can speak more to someone like me, someone that is just curious about this spiritual journey, this spiritual life, and how with little pieces of awakening and how we can awaken in different little parts of our life, how that can help in a day-to-day basis. And we don't need to go to the Himalayas to meditate for 20 years, right? To reach the benefits of just becoming a bit more aware. So I just throw it all out there and see what comes up. And also maybe you can also speak a bit about stillness and presence and how that is fantastic.
Yeah, another big one. Huh? I mean, the question that comes up for me is like, okay, awakening to what? It's like, if I'm waking, if it's called awakening, that must be that I'm somehow sleeping. I'm less awake. I'm numb. For me, awakening, I mean, of course, ultimately awakening leads us into love. That's been my experience so far. And it's also, widely shared in any spiritual tradition, that ultimately it comes down to love. If we're growing in love, we are growing. If we're not growing in love, we're not growing spiritually, Like love is really, and then of course one can ask, what is love? Which is another rabbit hole.
One thing that I was thinking of, which is to understand who am I and to understand what is my ego and what is presence. This is my view with very little experience, and this has changed my life a lot because just becoming aware that I have a mind, that I have stories, and that I have presence, and I can be in the present moment, and I can not necessarily follow the stories that I have in my mind, but become aware that I just have the mind, I just have the inner critic, I just have these kind of things in the mind, but I am way more than that. And that for me has been what I consider the beginning of the awakening that I have been experiencing without so much meditation or going into vipassana or going to retreats or anything like that, just from a regular guy who watches videos on the internet, plays some games here and there, just a regular person. Someone can also get to this point. Yeah.
Of course. So it's about really coming to for me, awakening has a lot to do with love, and it has a lot to do with truth. Like those are the two guiding things for me. And like you say, there is something called the mind and thinking and stories, but there is also something that is here regardless, So like one analogy is, of course, the sky. And there are clouds passing, and there is rain, and there is thunderstorms. But the sky, at some point, the sky always returns back to an empty blue sky. And it can be a lot of clouds one day, and it can be little clouds one day, but like the sky always remains. There is always space. And another analogy would be sound. Like when there is no sound, there is silence. And sound can arise and it can fall away. But at some point, silence, like the baseline, if you stop making sounds, what remains is silence. If you stop making clouds, what remains is the sky. There's a certain underlying spaciousness, or you can call it like an emptiness. The sky is empty, or the silence has no sound in it, Similarly, one needs to sort of become curious and start to awakening, like you speak about. A big part of it is to realize that when I'm not thinking, there is a quiet awareness inside, which is nothing mystical, really, because awareness is something that's become a very mysterious term, everything is awareness. And it's like, okay, what does that even mean? But it's like, there's a thing that I often do with, or sometimes do with my clients. It's an exercise to look at the hand, and it's to see, and then asking oneself, two questions. The first question being, do I need any effort? Do I need to exert any effort to see my hand? Do I have to do something to see my hand? And the answer is no. I just see my hand. Do I have to believe anything about the hand, or say anything about the hand, or think anything about the hand in order to see my hand? The answer is no. There is something in me that is just seeing the hand. And that seeing requires no effort on my behalf, and it requires no thinking. There is just the seeing of the hand. And this is always going on, This silent awareness is always there. And it's to see that is a deeper level of identity than the level of this is what I think about the world, or this is how I see the world. This is what I see. This is myself. So this is one of the big parts of awakening, is to become more curious about, is there some level of silence inside that I'm not connected with? And of course, that's very challenging because the mind is programmed to think all the time.
Yeah, and for me, it's just rather quite simple. Like, for example, I think about the heart. Do we need to do anything for the heart to beat? It's just doing it in a way. And for me, the beautiful thing about this silence, this spaciousness, and this presence is that by lowering the chatter in the mind, sometimes we may think that we need to figure out the world. And actually, by being in this stillness and in this presence, most of the answers of life come. Just by allowing that spaciousness is when life speaks the loudest. So instead of sitting down for 5 hours talking to ChatGPT, how can I fix this, and that, which is also beautiful, sometimes the answers that we're looking in life can come from inviting a bit more of this space and this presence. And in that space and that presence, life speaks quite loud and clear. And those clouds that we may have, those thoughts and those stories, just disconnect us a bit from the everlasting presence that we all have. And that's why I believe that, yes, it's super beautiful to become a monk and to be super aware of presence all the time and just to know everything. That is fantastic. And at the same time, many of us just live a regular life where we just don't have so much time for meditate, or we're just not even interested in that. But by inviting this awareness or this beginning of the awakening into what is presence and what is the silence in me, and beginning to detach a bit from the monkey mind, detach a bit from the stories, detach a bit from our thoughts, how many benefits that brings into life by just bringing a bit more of that awareness into presence.
Exactly. And when you speak about presence, obviously it insinuates that it is now. And now there's always a lot happening now. And the question is, am I really with what is happening now? Or am I thinking about the future or the past? That's like a huge, huge part of spiritual life, is to learn to be more in the present moment. And something that is always in the present moment is sensations in the body. Like right now, my heart is beating. If I focus, I can feel it. Right now, blood is being pumped through my veins. I could feel that. Right now, I'm sitting on this cushion and the floor, and I feel the weight of my body on the floor. I can feel it in my legs, and I can feel it in my butt. I can notice that I have a little bit of tension in my shoulders. That's also here now. Like, there are sensations happening all throughout my body. Some are gross and some are subtle. So again, this is nothing mysterious. This is basically just what does it feel like to exist in this body right now? What sensations are here? And can I allow them? Can I say yes to them? Okay, I feel a little bit of tension in my left leg. Can I say yes to that? Can I feel it without fighting with it, or like, oh, I shouldn't, oh, I'm getting old and I should be, like whatever judgment my mind could have around this? Can I put that on the side and just feel that? So feeling the sensations in the body is a great way to enter the moment more. And the other way is another thing that is always present in the moment is the breath. Because we are sentenced to a lifetime of breathing, and there's nothing we can do about it. We cannot choose to stop breathing.
Yeah.
We can choose to end it in a violent way, but as long as we're alive, our breath is happening. So that's another great tool, is to notice, okay, I'm breathing. I can feel my belly expanding and then my chest expanding. I can feel a little tickle on the inside of the nose. I notice that the in-breath is a bit colder than the out-breath. The air that goes in my nose is colder than the air that comes out. It's warmer. And I notice that there's a sense of outward and up on the in-breath, and there's a sense of inward and down on the out-breath. Like the body, of course, now I'm making it a bit bigger, just to show it. But there are all of these things that are happening now, and they can be a great support to help us into the present moment.
Right.
But the question is also why, but that maybe comes
exactly later. Like for me at least, I'm curious, like, yes, these are ways of connecting to presence that we all have in every moment, and we're doing it. We're just married to breathing. If you have trouble with fear of commitment, just know that you're committed to breathing in one way. But yeah, I'm curious about the benefits. Like, what are the benefits of these things, of becoming aware of the breath and like these kind of things?
Well, one thing with the compulsive thinking that we are all basically conditioned to comes stress and tension, nervous system activation. So like inner criticism, outer criticism, I have to this, I should this, that sort of thinking puts a sense of psychological pressure on us. And it's also a certain speed, certain stress.
I need to make money, I need to do this, I need the job and all
exactly.
that.
All of those thoughts create an inner tension, which eventually leads to sickness and stiffness and muscle pain, headaches,
depression,
so on and so forth. So as we detach from that and start to become more interested in what is actually present right now, sensations and breath and things, our nervous system and our muscles start relaxing. So with that comes a sense of pleasure, sense of inner relaxation. There's a sense of peace that starts arising over time. And then there is something truly magical. And this is why it's called spirituality and not relaxation, you know? It is called spirituality because what is universally happening to everybody who starts like earnestly and authentically connecting inside is that we start something inside, like a flower or a spring, you know, like some sort of shining light that's before being sort of closed off. Suddenly there's a little crack and there's this inner sunshine and that sunshine has different qualities. It has a sense of confidence. It has a sense of strength and vitality and aliveness that is just there. It has a sense of peace and stability, well-being, sense of trust, that somehow like a trust that everything will be okay and I can do it. It has a joy and a creative spark. There's a love. There's a natural sense of wanting to support others and support, like to give. There's a natural generosity. There is a sense of clarity. You know, I know who I am. I know what I want. There's a sense of power, empowerment, more courage. Like all of these qualities start just opening up on the inside by themselves. This is the magic, you know. As we start connecting, suddenly we're like, wow, you know, I feel a bit happier now, and maybe I want to quit smoking, or I just don't feel like these sort of negative habits that I've been doing. I just don't feel like doing them anymore. You know, and it happens very gradually and very suddenly. But then after a year or something, we're like, or maybe someone tells us from the outside, you know, hey, you've changed. You look more relaxed. What's going on? Oh yeah, I started meditation and walks every day, or what, you know, like it's a very gradual process, but it is a very real inner experience of all of these qualities opening up. And it happens, you know, in a subtle way. And why it's called spirituality is like once we really, there can be certain moments of like there can be like an opening. Suddenly there's this experience of life opens up and there's a big sense of inner peace. And there can be a sense of being in some sort of self-luminous space. And there's this big love and there's this knowing that's just like, that knows that I am this.
Yes.
And the word that I like the most is the word of remembering. You know, it's like that, you know, when you're stressed and you're looking for your keys and then suddenly like, oh, I know where they are. You know, it's that sense of like, oh, I know who I am. This I remember now. And it's such a clear, full body experience that nobody can tell you otherwise, because you have remembered something and that memory stretches before, if you look at it through time, before this body. This is the part where spirituality, nobody can teach you this. You have to have the experience. You have to have it in order to know it in that way. You don't have to have it in order to practice. You know, practice mindfulness, stillness, you know, all of these things we can do. But the discovery comes on its own. And it comes whenever it feels like it, you know?
Yeah.
Comes after a month, after a year, after a decade. Maybe it never comes. Maybe it comes at death. You know, that's when it's finally, you know, it's out of our control. That's my experience. The more I chase it, then it eludes me and then suddenly it comes. You know, it's like it's an inner experience that comes on its own accord and it's out of our control. But this is the This is the amrita, this is the nectar of creation. And if you taste it, you normally want more of it. Just the memory of it is an inner resource, So this is also what the coaching is about. It's not just about looking at our problems, but it is also through saying yes, to actually start an inner opening, which hopefully can, illuminate us, bring more happiness, basically, and inner peace.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with all the benefits. I also see that there are many different layers into this, right? Like, of course, I was saying before that you don't need to go to the Himalayas and meditate 20 years. But yes, in a way, these people that are more in the spiritual path and dedicate a lot more time, and they might be with this experience, their experience might be a lot stronger, or they might be more persistent in time. But I personally learned from one of my teachers that, and this is what I believe for myself, is that it is already here. Like, we don't need to go and search and 10 minutes every day of meditation so that I can open up, so that I can reach it. Like, no, I just think like the simple exercise that you brought before of like, just look at your hand, and can you see your hand? Can you feel your hand, like just doing that? Or can you do that with your breath, with your heartbeat? Those are moments, little moments of already that awakening, already that feeling of presence. And the more we invite that into our lives, into our daily lives, the more, at least for me, the one I use is just like, sometimes I remember to bring my breath to the bottom of my belly. And, throughout the day, sometimes that's what I do. And that's just our moments. And then there are days that I might be more connected to presence and days that are not. But yeah, there's so many different layers. But independently of that, we already have it. We already have presence, and we can already tap on these benefits from now.
Started from now, and there is nowhere else than, another saying we have in the Zen coaching community is that it's a journey from here to here, from now to now. And I like the approach of the Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who says that a moment of mindfulness is a moment of enlightenment. Like, we can be enlightened or awake one moment, like that breath, and then the next breath, I'm lost in something. And then I can be lost for an hour, and then I can come back to, like, that's the best approach, to not see it like a linear, like, journey where, there's a lot of bad and somewhere in the future is the good,
Yeah.
But rather, every moment, you can only be awake in the moment. It doesn't matter what happened until now. If I did no meditation until now, nothing to do about it. So approaching it as a practice, you just do it whenever you remember, and in the capacity that you can, and what fits in one's own lifestyle, and what kind of thing do I like and enjoying. Like, basically, the practice is what brings me more into my lived experience right now. Is it art? Is it dancing? Is it meditation? Is it music? Is it walking in nature? Is it working out, CrossFit, or whatever it is? So it's really not about the practice. It is, the main thing is to come into a yes. Can I say yes to this experience as it is right now? Yes to the pleasure, yes to the tension, yes to my situation that I'm in, whatever it is. Say yes to my sadness, whatever is here. And that yes is the opener. That's the door. Really. I think, like, if there's anything to really, really take away from this conversation, is that we are where we are for so many reasons, and we cannot be anywhere else than we are right now. And there's nothing wrong with us. Everything that happened inside of us came from an inner instinct and drive to stay protected, to stay safe, to make sure that we are loved, and accepted. There's nothing that gone wrong, really. This is just our instinct that has put us in this situation. We haven't done anything wrong. Maybe wrong things have happened to us, and that's painful. All of us need to start where we are, and there is so much support now. There are so many great resources online. There are thousands of super skilled therapists and coaches and so many podcasts. There is so much support, and the only thing we need is an authentic motivation to sort of find a place of inner peace. There is a longing, there's a longing for happiness, there's a longing for love, and there's a longing for connection and community. That longing, that is the beacon, that is the energy that fuels us. We need to remember that longing and honor it and act on it. And as long as we are earnest and authentic in our search for awakening, for healing, and we're willing to open up for support from life, it can only go one direction. It can only go more into inner peace and love, and because that is the truth of everything. And really, inner peace, like peace, is the way. And someday the world will also understand. We don't have to go to wars. We don't have to fight with each other. Actually, we can collaborate. We can support each other. We can actually make this place nicer for all of us, including animals and plants and so on and so forth. And all of this comes from this inner source. Source of everything we're looking for is inside. And when we don't know that, we feel it as a longing. And to just honor that, I think, is the main message, and to not be so hard on ourselves, because we're all doing great, in my opinion. And if they want to find me, there's a website and there's some email and stuff that we can share in the notes, maybe.
Yeah,
For
sure.
Yeah.
For sure. That'll be great. Yeah. All right. So that's it for today. Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you,
Really
Jorge.
appreciate
Nice
you
to be
for
here.
coming here.